If you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? Not the kind of love that comes easy, not the kind that fits inside the lines, or earns you praise from your father, or a blessing from your town's preacher. I'm talking about the kind of love that steals your breath in the silence between footsteps, the kind that lives in a glance, a whisper, a touch that should never have happened, the kind that ruins you or saves you. I once knew a girl who had to make that choice. She lived in a dusty little town pressed between the hills and the railroad line, where the wind always carried stories and the sun showed no mercy. Her name was Clara Briggs, and she was the only daughter of Sheriff William Briggs, a man as feared as he was respected. The kind of man who believed that a rule broken was a soul damned. A man who wore his badge like a second skin, and taught his daughter to do the same. But no one teaches your heart who it's allowed to want. Clara was raised behind law and shutters. No saloon, no suitors without a badge or a Bible. She rode horses like a soldier and shot better than most deputies, but inside she was lonely. Not for lack of people, but for lack of being seen. No one ever asked her if she was happy, only if she was strong. And she always was, until the outlaw came. He rode into town like the wind itself, cloaked in dust and silence. His name whispered on wanted posters, Elijah Black. They said he robbed trains, vanished into canyons, rode with a gang that carved a path of lawlessness across the territory. But no one ever caught him. No one ever really saw him. Until Clara did. It was the morning, after a rain, when the sky was soft and the earth smelled like second chances. Clara was out by the ridge, checking the water troughs her father insisted she patrol. That's when she saw him, bleeding, slumped against an old cottonwood, half dead and full of danger. She should have drawn her gun, should have tied him up and dragged him back to town. But she didn't. Maybe it was the way his eyes locked with hers. Or maybe it was the way he didn't reach for his weapon. Only looked at her like he'd been running a long time and finally wanted to stop. Whatever it was, Clara made a choice that morning. Not with her head, not with her father's law echoing in her bones. She chose with her heart. She told no one. She hid him in the abandoned stable near the edge of her family's land, fed him, cleaned his wounds, asked no questions. But every night she returned, and every night the silence between them grew softer, then sweeter. He told her stories, not the ones from the wanted posters, but stories about the stars in New Mexico, about his sister who died in a fire, about the preacher's son who turned him away when he begged for food. She listened, and in listening she learned that love has no badge, no border, no rules. But love in secret is a storm that grows teeth. Clara knew it couldn't last. Not in a town like theirs. Not with a father like hers. Every day the walls closed in. Every glance from a neighbor, every sermon about sin, every ride her father took hunting outlaws. It all pressed down on her like a noose tightening. And still she kept going back to him, because sometimes love is the only thing that makes you feel alive. But what do you do when the world demands you choose? When the law and your blood pull one way and your heart another? That's what Clara would have to answer, and the cost of her choice would shake the town to its bones. If love feels like drowning, is it still worth the breath? Clara asked herself that one night, her hands trembling over a basin of water turned red with his blood. Elijah had tried to leave, said he didn't want to bring her trouble, said staying meant she'd burn with him when the fire came. But trouble had already found her heart, and fire well, she'd never felt more alive than in its warmth. She told him to sit still, told him the wound in his side was deep, but not fatal. She pressed the cloth firm. He winced, but didn't curse. Just stared at her like she was something holy in a world that had long since gone to hell. "I ain't worth this," he murmured. "You patching me up like I'm some broken fence." Clara didn't flinch. "You're not a fence," she said. "You're a man. And no one's patched you up in a long time, have they?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't touch beyond cloth and skin and healing. But something passed between them. Something deeper than lust. Something even heavier than love. It was recognition. The kind that only happens when two people know what it means to feel alone, even in a room full of others. But while Clara watched his chest rise and fall, peaceful for once, the world outside kept spinning. And it spun sharp. The townsfolk had noticed her. Whispered about her riding alone too much. About how Sheriff Briggs had grown colder, quieter, as if he sensed something slipping just beyond his grasp. And he had. Fathers know, especially fathers like him, men who made a living sniffing out secrets and sins. One afternoon, as the sun burned low and long across the dirt street, Sheriff Briggs called Clara into the parlor. He sat with his badge off and his whiskey out. Never a good sign. The room was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made a soul itch. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "You've changed," he said, "eyes too far away. You got shadows under your smile." Clara didn't speak. Her hands were folded like she was 13 again, and about to be punished for riding bareback through the churchyard. "I raised you to see danger coming from a mile away," he continued. "So why do I get the feelin' you're bringing it home?" She could have lied, said she was tired, said the chores had worn her thin, but lies are for cowards. And Clara Briggs had never been a coward, not until now. She stood, spine stiff, and said, "I'm not bringing danger home," but her voice cracked, and her father heard it. The days that followed were thin with fear. Clara would slip out at dawn or dusk, when the shadows ran long and the chance of being seen was low. Each visit to Elijah came with risk, but he was healing, too fast for her comfort. His strength returned. His eyes, once sunken and tired, began to shine again, and Clara knew. The end was near. "I'll be gone by Friday," he said one night, the moon painting silver across his face. She shook her head. "Don't tell me when, just tell me you'll be careful." "I'll tell you this," he whispered. "If I go with a piece of you I'll never give back." And she almost begged him to take her with him. Almost. But family chains are forged deep. And her father, strict, cold, relentless, was still her blood. Could she betray him for the one man he hunted with fire in his eyes? That's the curse of forbidden love. It doesn't just ask you to feel, it demands you choose. And sometimes, no matter which road you take, you lose something you can't ever get back. If your heart knew the truth, but your name and blood stood against it, would you betray your name? Would you betray your father? That question haunted Clara like a wolf circling her campfire, always just outside the light, always ready to strike when she closed her eyes. Every step she took back toward that stable felt heavier, like the land itself was warning her, like her soul already knew the cost that was coming. And still she went. Elijah's wound had scabbed over, but something inside him hadn't healed. He didn't speak as much anymore, just stared out the cracks in the wooden slats toward the hills, toward freedom. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he knew it was almost time to go. Or maybe he didn't want to look at Clara too long, in case goodbye started to look like betrayal. That night, it rained hard. The kind of rain that makes the earth bleed red and horses restless in their stalls. Clara slipped from her window, coat heavy on her shoulders, hair tied back like a boy's, and rode through the storm to him. When she got there, he was gone. Panic is a funny thing. It doesn't scream at you. It whispers. Fast and cruel. She dropped to her knees where his blanket used to be, her hands running over the packed dirt, like maybe he'd left a note, a sign, a single word that could explain why he would leave without her, why he would vanish into the night after everything they shared. But he hadn't gone far. She found him under the lean-to, drenched, shoulders tight, staring out at nothing. "You were going to leave," she said, voice steady, even though her heart wasn't. He didn't turn. "I have to leave, Clara. Your town's sniffing for blood. Your father's riding longer, asking louder. My name's on his breath." She stepped closer. "So you'd go without saying goodbye? I was trying to make it easier for you. But it doesn't," she said. "It rips something out of me." He turned then. Rain clung to his lashes. "You think I'm not ripped already?" They stood like that, soaked, shivering, more alive than they'd ever been. And then he did something he'd never done before. He kissed her. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't careful. It was desperate, like two people trying to memorize each other before time tore them apart. When it ended, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Take me with you." The words shocked them both. "No," he said. "I won't have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. I already do. You belong here. I don't belong anywhere but with you." He stepped back, pain in his eyes so sharp it could have cut stone. "Clara, I am not the man you think I am. I've done things, real things. I'm not some lost lamb waiting for redemption. I'm not looking to save you," she whispered. "I'm looking to love you." That silence between them. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a storm takes down a house. Then behind them, a twig snapped. A horse snorted, and Clara's blood froze. Voices, boots, and one of them, her father's. He'd found them. Her world collapsed in one breath. Elijah's eyes met hers, wide, burning, full of the kind of fear that men like him weren't supposed to feel. He grabbed her hand, but it was too late. Light flooded the stable as men burst through the doors. Her father was at the front, pistol drawn, face twisted, not in rage, but in heartbreak. The girl he raised, the one he kept clean, proud and righteous, was standing beside the very devil he'd hunted for 3 years, and she wasn't letting go of his hand. If your father raised you to know right from wrong, but your heart burned for what he called wrong, could you still face him and say you were proud? That night, Clara did. She didn't move when the men rushed in. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stood between her father and Elijah, her fingers still wrapped around the outlaw's hand like it was the last piece of truth she had left in a world that had suddenly gone cold. "Step aside, Clara," her father said. His voice didn't shake. That wasn't his way. But something in his eyes, God help her, it did. He wasn't just looking at an outlaw. He was looking at the worst kind of betrayal. The kind that wears your last name and stands in front of your gun. "No," she said. That one word, it changed everything. Sheriff Briggs lowered his weapon just enough to make her think there was still a bridge between them. "You don't understand what he is, what he's done. I understand more than you think. You're choosing him? I'm choosing me, Pa, and I found me with him." The men behind him shifted, nervous, confused. One of them muttered something about crazy women and bastards in love. Another laughed under his breath, but her father didn't blink. He took a single step forward, looking Elijah straight in the eye. "You run with the Hayes gang?" Elijah didn't answer. Briggs cocked his gun. "Elijah," Clara whispered, "don't." And the outlaw did something then Clara would never forget. He stepped forward, just slightly, placing his body between Clara and the barrel of the sheriff's pistol. "I don't run with anyone anymore," he said quietly. "But yeah, I was with them, years ago, until they killed a woman and her child in Kansas. That's when I walked." "Convenient story," Briggs spat. "It ain't a story," Elijah said, "and I'm not asking for your forgiveness." "Good," her father replied, raising the gun again, "'cause I'm not offering it." The world slowed. Clara's breath caught, and then she moved. She threw herself in front of Elijah, arms wide, voice breaking like thunder in the stable's wooden ribs. "You shoot him, you shoot through me." Briggs froze, and the silence after that. It was louder than any gunshot. It wasn't just the sheriff's rage that trembled then. It was his grief, his shame, his disbelief that the girl he raised, the one who never missed Sunday service, who helped dying horses find peace, who kissed her mother's grave every spring, was standing in front of a wanted man like he was something sacred. "Why?" he asked her, quietly now. Just a father, just a man. Clara stepped forward, her hands lowered, her face soaked in rain and tears and all the dust of choices that couldn't be undone. "Because he sees me," she said. "Not the sheriff's daughter, not some pawn on a porch waiting for marriage and manners. Me. He sees my scars, and he doesn't flinch." Her voice cracked again, but she held it together like her whole life depended on it. "I love him," she whispered. Her father's gun dropped slowly to his side, and that was when the real pain began. Because it's one thing to pull a trigger, it's another to watch your child walk away from you by choice. If you turned your back on everything you knew, would love be enough to carry you through what came after? That's what Clara learned in the days that followed. Because saying, "I choose love," isn't the end of a story. It's just the beginning of a harder one. The town turned on her, quiet and fast. The same women who used to compliment her braid at church now crossed the street when she passed. The general store stopped offering her credit. The preacher's wife left a folded note in their mailbox. God sees everything. Her name, once spoken with admiration, was now spit like a curse. And her father. He hadn't spoken a word to her since that night in the stable. He'd lowered his gun. He hadn't stopped her. But something in him had shut tight, like a cellar door slammed in a storm. She'd see him sometimes, across the yard, hat low, face like stone. But he never looked up. That silence. It hurt worse than if he'd screamed. Elijah stayed in the shadows, for her sake, not his. He never slept in the same place twice, never let the fire burn too long, and when he came to her in the dark, he came like a man who knew time was a thief. Every kiss, every touch was soaked in fear and fire. They held each other like the world was ending, because for them it already had. "I could take you tonight," he said once, as they lay under a blanket of stars, the moon watching like a quiet judge. "We ride west, start over, change names. No one would ever find us." Clara smiled. "They'd find us eventually. Then we die running," he said. She looked at him, eyes soft. "No, if we go, we live. We don't just survive, we live." But living meant more than leaving. It meant facing things. So the next morning, Clara saddled her horse and rode into town alone. She wore her mother's scarf and boots that had carried her through every storm, and she went to the jailhouse. Not for Elijah, for her father. He was at his desk, boots on the wood, coffee cooling beside his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "I'm not here to apologize," she said. Still no reply. "But I wanted you to know I'm leaving." That got his attention. He looked up, slow, heavy, like the years had suddenly caught up with him all at once. "You're running," he said. "No," she answered. "I'm choosing." He scoffed. "You don't choose outlaws, Clara. You fall for 'em. They use you, then they ride off while you're left picking up the pieces. Elijah's not using me. He's a criminal. He's a man, and he's more honest with me than this whole town's ever been." He stood then, taller than she remembered. The badge on his chest caught the light, and his eyes, God, his eyes, looked like a man watching his daughter slip through his fingers and knowing there's no rope strong enough to pull her back. "You leave," he said, voice barely holding. "You don't come back." Clara swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I already left the day you pointed that gun," she whispered, and she walked out. She didn't cry. Not then. Not until she saw Elijah waiting by the river, horses saddled, bags packed. He didn't smile. He just opened his arms. And she fell into them. Behind her, the town shrank. Before her, the wild opened. And as they rode west, toward nothing but open sky, and the kind of future no one would give them, Clara held tight to the man she'd chosen, the man who saw her, the man who held her when the world let go. But even then, she knew, the past wasn't finished with them. Not yet. What if love gives you freedom, but never peace? They rode for 7 days, westward through canyon and prairie, chasing a horizon that always stayed just out of reach. Clara thought that if they could just cross enough rivers, climb enough hills, put enough dust between them and the life they'd left behind, maybe the weight in her chest would ease. But you can't outrun blood. You can't unlove your father. And you can't forget the way he looked at you when you said goodbye. Sometimes at night, she'd wake to the crackle of the fire and find Elijah staring into it, like he saw every mistake he'd ever made in the flames. He wouldn't speak unless she asked. And even then, his voice was lower, like something inside him was still waiting for the world to punish him for being happy. "Do you regret it?" he asked her once, under the red glow of the setting sun. Clara turned toward him. "What part?" "Leaving. Your name. Your father." She took a breath, deep and long. No, but she didn't say yes either, because the truth was, there were nights she missed the smell of her mama's baking, the creak of the porch swing, the way her father used to clear his throat before saying something serious, like it bought him time to soften the blow. But then Elijah would take her hand, and she'd remember why she left. They found work on a small cattle ranch near the border, a place where no one asked questions, and everyone kept to themselves. Elijah took to fixing fences and breaking wild mustangs. Clara tended chickens, kept the books, and for the first time in her life, she woke up to birdsong instead of silence. They lived in a tiny cabin with a leaky roof and a door that never quite closed right. But it was theirs, and some days that felt like a miracle. Still, peace is a fragile thing, especially when your name is written in the wanted pages of a dozen lawmen's desks. It was late spring when a stranger rode into the ranch. Tall, clean boots, quiet eyes. Said he was passing through, looking for a place to water his horse. But he lingered too long, watched Clara too closely, asked too many questions about the strong farmhand with the dark past. Elijah knew before Clara did, knew the way a hunted man knows when the scent's been caught. That night, He didn't touch his dinner, just stared out the window. "We have to run again," he said. Clara looked up from the bread she was slicing. "We've only just started living. They won't let us." She dropped the knife. "Then we don't let them. We stay. We fight." He turned to her, eyes tired and full of all the years he'd spent not belonging anywhere. "Clara, if they catch me, I hang. No judge, no trial. Just a rope and a crowd. Then I'll ride with you, again." But even as she said it, she felt the fear wrap around her spine. Love demands everything, and sometimes it takes more than it gives. A week later, the sheriff from El Paso rode in with 3 deputies. Said they'd gotten a tip. Said they were hunting a man named Elijah Black. Said they were offering a reward for information. And Clara, she stood at the window of that tiny cabin, her heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear the birds anymore. They'd found them. The past had come knocking. And this time, she didn't know if love would be strong enough to answer the door.